Tonight we talk about the forbidden flirtations of Julia the Elder. Picture the marble skyline of ancient Rome, burnished gold under the setting sun. You hear the bustle of the forum fading, sandals scraping on stone, the laughter of merchants melting into the hush of torches being lit. Somewhere behind the Palatine's guarded gates, a young woman leans from a balcony. Perfumed air from her garden mingles with the iron tang of the Tiber below. You probably won't survive this story not because it's violent, but because you might start sympathizing with someone history tried to erase. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are in the heart of the Roman Empire, 39 BC, and the air smells of power. Julia the Elder, daughter of Gaius Octavius, better known to eternity as Augustus, arrives into a world that already belongs to her father. He is building an empire out of broken republics, turning marble dreams into law. For him, every move is strategic, every family member a chess piece. You, watching from the edge of that marble cradle, can almost hear the expectations being stacked around Julia like layers of marble dust. From the moment she learns to walk, she's accompanied by whispers, priests predicting virtue, tutors drilling poetry and politics, servants trained to smile but not speak. Augustus has one child and intends for her to symbolize Roman morality itself. She will not merely wear silk. She will be a symbol of order, chastity, the domestic ideal. You can almost hear her sigh when someone reminds her she is the daughter of the gods. But Julia is no marble statue. Even as a child, she finds delight in the forbidden, sneaking honey cakes to slaves, mocking senators' togas behind pillars, asking too many questions about why women can't speak in the Senate. Historians still argue whether she was truly rebellious or just lonely, performing mischief as a way to feel alive in a palace of shadows. A mainstream fact to ground us: Augustus's Rome was obsessed with virtue's moral virtue, especially in women. He built laws to control marriage, fidelity, and even childbearing, believing family purity would keep Rome strong. The irony? His daughter would become the living contradiction to his own reforms. As she grows, Julia becomes the talk of the empire, not for scandal yet, but for beauty and wit. She speaks with the polish of Cicero, but laughs like a tavern girl. People adore her because she feels human in a world of demigods. One quirky detail: Augustus tried to limit her exposure to unworthy influences, so he surrounded her with older, stern female tutors, one of whom allegedly read philosophy, allowed during meals to temper the appetite. That's one way to ruin dinner conversation. You stand beside her in the garden as she stares down from the hill at the city lights. Beneath her, men in armor drink and boast about conquering Gaul, while she dreams of conquering something else, her own future. Her name alone opens every door, yet every room she enters is locked in another way. Even as a teenager, Julia is aware of the power she holds, not from armies or decrees, but from the way people look at her. A glance from her could bend the will of a senator or soften the wrath of her father temporarily. But power borrowed from beauty is a dangerous kind, as you'll soon see. She learns early that Rome adores an image more than a truth. Augustus crafts hers like a sculptor, virtuous, obedient, the ideal Roman matron in training. Yet when she passes the mirror-polished bronze, she smiles slightly, as if the reflection itself knows better. You might call it arrogance, or maybe it's prophecy. As the moon rises over the Palatine, you sense it. The empire's golden girl is already plotting her own kind of conquest. Not through wars or politics, but through hearts. The first time Julia is told she will marry, she's barely out of childhood. You watch her face, too calm for her age, as the news is delivered like an edict. There's no candlelight proposal, no shy exchange of smiles, just a scroll, sealed by her father's hand. Her husband will be Marcellus, Augustus's nephew, the emperor's golden boy and heir apparent. The marriage is not about love, it's about symmetry. Julia's beauty and lineage will polish Marcellus's future, and as with so many Roman women of her rank, her own future is considered already decided. In this world, affection is optional, but alliance is mandatory. Rome doesn't run on hearts, it runs on airs. You picture Julia standing before the bridal mirror, the gold thread of her gown catching torchlight like liquid fire. Her attendants murmur blessings while Augustus beams, seeing not a daughter but a dynasty. Julia, meanwhile, counts the moments until she can breathe again. The wedding feast is the talk of the city, grapes spilling from silver bowls, lyres humming, senators pretending to dance, and in the middle of it all, Julia sits beside her young husband, smiling the smile of someone performing perfection. A quirky detail for you: Roman brides wore a flame-colored veil called the flammum, symbolizing both purity and obedience. Imagine being wrapped in literal fire to promise submission. You almost have to laugh or cry. Historians still argue whether Julia and Marcellus ever loved each other. Some say they were affectionate, others insist their marriage was little more than theater. What's certain is that it ended too soon. Within 2 years, Marcellus fell ill and died, leaving Julia widowed before 20. Rome mourned. Augustus raged at the gods. Julia? She just stared out her window, silent, as the city that had celebrated her wedding now whispered about her curse. But in grief, something changes. She becomes sharper, more aware of her surroundings, her place in the empire's chessboard. When Augustus next arranges her marriage to Marcus Agrippa, his trusted general twice her age, she no longer expects love. She expects control, perhaps even partnership. Agrippa is powerful, loyal, and the kind of man who commands storms by shouting at them. And yet, their union surprises everyone. Julia, now maturing into womanhood, softens the grizzled general. Together they have 5 children, and for a brief, shining moment, she seems content. Agrippa gives her space to laugh, to host dinners, to be her own version of proper. You can imagine her teasing senators at the table while Agrippa smiles behind his cup of wine, pretending not to mind. The empire breathes easier. Augustus, proud once more, displays his daughter and grandchildren like trophies of moral success. But beneath the marble calm, something restless stirs in Julia again. She enjoys being admired, not just obeyed. She hosts salons filled with poets, philosophers, and politicians, the kind of men who quote Virgil but forget their vows. You, sitting in the corner, can sense that dangerous electricity of intellect mixed with charm. Then, tragedy strikes again. Agrippa dies suddenly while away on campaign, leaving Julia widowed for a second time. The palace grows quiet except for the soft rustle of her mourning veil. She's only 26, beautiful, clever, and by Roman standards, far too independent. Augustus grieves his friend, but soon resumes his favorite habit, choosing his daughter. To reinforce his vision of Rome, her next husband will be Tiberius, the emperor's stepson, stiff and joyless, as warm as a statue. He's a soldier with little patience for wit or warmth. Their union is less a marriage than a merger. Julia tries to play the dutiful wife again, but this time, the script feels unbearable. You can see her in the moonlight, walking the colonnades alone, her sandals whispering over the marble. Her reflection flickers in bronze lamps, one moment regal, the next defiant. The empire may have its laws, but she is beginning to sense the pull of something far older and wilder: desire. The quiet rebellion of being alive in a world built by men. And so, while Rome sleeps, Julia begins to imagine what it might feel like to truly live. By now, the city hums with rumor every time Julia walks through the forum. You can almost hear the collective intake of breath as she passes, her veil perfectly ranged, her steps unhurried, her eyes scanning the crowd with that mischievous spark that has undone so many well-trained men. She's not reckless yet. She's curious, and curiosity, in imperial Rome, is a dangerous luxury. Her days are spent performing propriety. Mornings begin with visits to the temple of Vesta, where she dutifully offers incense for the stability of her father's reign. Afternoons bring lessons in philosophy, household management, and the latest gossip from noble matrons. But evenings are when the city breathes differently. Beneath the arches of the Palatine and the flicker of oil lamps, Julia learns that words can be flirtations and glances can be declarations. The porticos of Rome become her playground. You walk with her through the shaded columns where senators stroll after debates, pretending to admire the architecture while discussing taxes and battles. Julia's laughter drifts between them like music. She asks about poetry, challenges their logic, even quotes Ovid back to them, a subtle rebellion, since her father had begun to frown upon the poet's amorous themes. One senator, flustered by her wit, drops his scroll. Another nearly forgets his wife's name. Historians still argue whether Julia truly broke any boundaries at this stage, or merely danced along their edges. Some say she simply enjoyed the thrill of attention. Others claim this was when her court of admirers first took shape, a salon of clever, daring men drawn to the forbidden charm of Augustus's daughter. Among them, Iulus Antonius, the dashing son of Mark Antony. His presence alone is irony thick enough to cut with a stylus, the child of Augustus's old rival, now whispering compliments to his daughter. Julia enjoys the paradox. She knows her lineage shields her, at least for now. When someone teases her about propriety, she reportedly replies, "I never take a lover unless he's worthy of my father's friendship." It's the kind of joke that makes scholars grin centuries later, half admiring, half scandalized. A mainstream fact grounds this glittering scene. Augustus had by then passed strict moral reforms, known as the Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercendis, laws that criminalized adultery and even banished those caught. He named them after her, ironically meant to uphold Roman virtue. It's hard not to imagine Julia smirking at that, a law meant to cage desire bearing her own name. There's also a quirky tidbit worth savoring. Some ancient writers claim she would only entertain her suitors when the moon was full, believing the goddess Luna favored women who pursued pleasure without guilt. Whether true or poetic exaggeration, it adds a shimmer of myth to her midnight walks. You see her one of those nights, the marble cool beneath her sandals, the air heavy with cypress and secrets. The men gathered near the fountains lower their voices as she approaches, but her laughter breaks through, soft yet commanding. She doesn't need to touch anyone. Her presence alone is enough to tilt the atmosphere. Still, you can sense the tension building. Her father's reforms have created a Rome obsessed with appearances. Every family wants to seem pure, every wife chaste, every daughter obedient. Yet behind closed doors, the same people indulge in every pleasure they condemn. Julia merely refuses to pretend as convincingly as the rest. Sometimes she stands on her balcony overlooking the Forum, watching torchlight ripple over the statues of gods. She thinks of her mother, Scribonia, divorced the day Julia was born, sent away like a loose thread cut from the imperial tapestry. She thinks of Agrippa, her only real partner, now gone, as she wonders if the gods, too, get bored of perfection. As dawn breaks, she draws her shawl tighter and whispers something almost like a promise to herself, to the city, or to the restless pulse beneath its marble veins. She's not done yet. The world may have crowned her as Rome's ideal woman, but she intends to rewrite what that means. One dangerous smile at a time. The air in Rome changes when the sun goes down. The same streets that echo with stern senatorial footsteps by day soften into corridors of whispers. By night, you follow Julia as she moves through them, her cloak drawn close, the scent of myrrh and honey trailing behind. The guards at the Palatine gates know better than to question her after all. Who would dare stop the emperor's daughter for taking an evening walk? What they don't know is that the walk never ends where it should. She slips through a small courtyard behind the theater of Marcellus, once her first husband's legacy, now her secret stage. The space is candlelit, crowded with couches and laughter. You've arrived at what the poets call Julia's midnight salon, a gathering that dances between philosophy and seduction. Senators, scholars, and soldiers mingle under the guise of intellectual debate. But everyone knows this is where Rome's true heat resides. Wine flows like conversation. Someone recites verses by Propertius. Another answers with a scandalous new line of Ovid's Ars Amatoria. Julia laughs, not because the joke is funny, but because it's bold. This is her kingdom where words break rules and laughter carries the weight of rebellion. Historians still argue whether these salons were innocent or orgiastic. Some claim they were little more than poetry readings gone long past midnight. Others insist they were coded rituals of pleasure, where political intrigue and passion intertwined. Whatever the truth, you can feel the thrill of danger hovering over the candles. One mainstream fact, Augustus had by this time doubled down on his moral reforms. publicly condemning vice and even exiling friends who defied them. He built temples to virtue and family, sculpted his own image as the father of moral Rome. And yet here, his daughter, his living symbol of purity, was hosting symposiums that mocked every word of those decrees. A quirky tidbit: ancient gossip claims Julia once turned up at the forum disguised as a commoner, just to hear what people said about her. When she overheard that men adored her beauty but feared her father, she reportedly said, "Let them fear him and desire me." You have to admit that's first-class imperial sass. The laughter at her salon grows softer as the hour deepens. You can almost feel her eyes move from one guest to another, measuring wit, ambition, danger. Aulus Antonius is there again, seated too close, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. He quotes Virgil's Aeneid, lines about Dido's doomed passion, and Julia smiles like she understands the subtext perfectly. There's a tension between them that no one dares name, though everyone senses it. Or still, the salon isn't just about love, it's about power. The only thing in Rome more intoxicating than wine. The men who attend are those who feel caged by Augustus's strictness. In Julia, they see a living alternative, grace without obedience, intellect without apology. They debate politics and poetry with her not because they expect her to yield, but because she never does. Yet you notice something else, too: how carefully she balances on the edge. For every daring joke, there's a gesture of restraint. For every bold glance, a moment of decorum. She knows the empire's eyes are everywhere. And even here, beneath music and laughter, she's performing survival. As the final cups are drained, the guests drift out one by one, vanishing into the misted alleys. Only Julia remains for a while, staring into the dying flame of a lamp. She looks neither triumphant nor guilty, only thoughtful. Maybe she's wondering if this, too, is a kind of imprisonment, being worshipped, desired, yet never free. When she finally rises, the hem of her cloak brushes against spilled wine that glistens like blood in the candlelight. You sense something has shifted tonight, a boundary crossed not by action, but by intention. Back in the palace, as the dawn light creeps across the mosaics, Julia slips out of her sandals and into silence. The echo of laughter still lingers in the air, faint but insistent. For now, her secret world remains hidden. But secrets, as Rome always proves, have a way of climbing the marble steps to power. Morning in Rome smells of olive oil, marble dust, and rumor. The city wakes with the rustle of scrolls and sandals, and before breakfast, Julia's name is already on half of them. You follow her through the echoing halls of the Palatine, her expression composed, her movements unhurried. She knows that pretending not to care is its own kind of armor. But gossip has weight here, heavier than gold, sharper than a dagger. Whispers slither from one banquet to another, that Julia's salons are getting bolder, that the men who attend them are growing reckless, that even Aulus Antonius has begun writing poems too personal for public recitation. You can feel the city tilt toward scandal, like a vase one push away from shattering. Still, she plays her role by day, the dutiful wife of Tiberius, hosting public ceremonies, appearing at temples, smiling just enough to maintain the illusion of harmony. Tiberius, on the other hand, looks perpetually miserable. He's a man more suited to war camps than dinner parties, more comfortable issuing commands than compliments. Some say he envies Julia's charm. Others whisper he fears it. You, standing nearby, can sense the frost between them, the kind that burns rather than chills. Historians still argue whether Tiberius truly despised her or simply couldn't keep up. Whatever the truth, their marriage is unraveling faster than a senator's toga at a bacchanal. When Tiberius finally asks Augustus for permission to leave Rome and command in Rhodes, it's both a retreat and an escape. Julia is left behind, unguarded, unamused, and for the first time untethered. Without Tiberius's grim presence, her evenings grow livelier. She surrounds herself with friends who share her wit and disregard for hypocrisy. Men like Sempronius Gracchus, Cornelius Scipio, and of course, the ever-dashing Aulus Antonius. Each of them carries both admiration and ambition. And Julia, perhaps flattered, perhaps defiant, allows the game to play on. A mainstream fact for your pillow talk tonight: adultery was not merely frowned upon in Rome. It was a crime. A husband was legally required to report his wife if she strayed. Failing to do so could ruin him too. Under Augustus's reforms, even an imperial daughter wasn't exempt. And yet, the irony remains, the emperor who wrote the laws about fidelity had created a court so repressed that desire had to find cracks to slip through. A quirky tidbit, ancient writers say Julia and her lovers sometimes met on the very steps of the temple of Apollo, Augustus's favorite god. Symbol of light and purity, they'd leave by dawn before worshippers arrived, laughing at their own audacity. Whether true or exaggerated, the story has survived to millennia, and honestly, that kind of commitment to chaos deserves a slow clapper still. It wasn't just lust that drew her to these men, it was conversation, danger, the sense of being seen. Julia's entire life had been curated, her words rehearsed, her gestures observed, her worth measured in alliances. To be desired on her own terms must have felt intoxicating. You can almost feel her pulse quicken when someone calls her by her name, not her title. Yet the more her heart defies control, the tighter the web grows. Her admirers begin to compete, their rivalry spilling into politics. Letters are exchanged, verses written, favors promised. And somewhere in the background, the emperor's spies begin to whisper too. Rome is never silent for long. Julia stands on her balcony one evening, watching lightning split the sky over the Tiber. She knows storms she's lived in one her entire life, but this one feels closer, more personal. She smiles faintly, perhaps realizing she's become both the thunder and the struck. Down below, in the city's taverns, the storytellers begin spinning tales of Julia's secret lovers. Some are fiction, others too close to fact for comfort. The empire's golden girl has turned into its most dangerous rumor. And you, standing there in the cool night breeze beside her, can't help but sense that the game is nearing its edge. The flirtations that once felt thrilling now tremble with consequence. The empire is watching, and the emperor her father is listening. By now, the Palatine Hill feels less like a palace and more like a pressure cooker. The marble corridors whisper, servants bow lower, speak softer, and vanish faster. You walk beside Julia, and you can almost sense her awareness sharpen the knowledge that every gesture might now be observed, every smile interpreted, every whisper turned into evidence. Augustus, the man who rebuilt Rome and tried to rebuild its morality, has begun to suspect that his daughter, the empire's model of virtue, is mocking him from within his own walls. He hears fragments of gossip, rumors of secret meetings, laughter at forbidden hours, the echo of sandals on temple steps when no one should be there. He doesn't believe it at first. After all, this is his Julia, his pride, his proof that virtue can be taught, inherited, legislated. But emperors are not built to ignore rumor. They are built to investigate it. Historians still argue whether it was jealousy, political necessity, or genuine heartbreak that drove Augustus to act. Some say he feared public hypocrisy more than personal betrayal. Others claim he loved Julia too deeply to confront her until the evidence became undeniable. Whatever the truth, his spies were relentless. Rome was a city addicted to secrets, and secrets have a way of floating to the surface like oil on water. You can almost see the reports piling up, letters from guards, notes from informants, the testimonies of servants who swore they saw shadows moving across forbidden halls. Each line another nail in the coffin of discretion. A mainstream fact, by O to BC. Augustus's Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercendus, his own adultery law, had become the empire's favorite weapon. He had exiled friends and even noble women for far less than what Julia was accused of. To spare her would make him a hypocrite before the Senate and the gods. To punish her would break what remained of his family. The tension is unbearable, and Julia, always perceptive, can feel it. Her laughter at dinners becomes rarer, her replies more measured. Even her friends grow cautious. Aulus Antonius, once bold in his devotion, now lingers in the background like a man already condemned. Yet still, the thrill hasn't vanished. It's only changed flavor, sweeter, darker. Like forbidden fruit that ripens in the shadow of death. There's a quirky detail tucked away in Suetonius's accounts. Augustus supposedly tried to combat his grief by increasing his self-control. He stopped drinking wine altogether, claiming that even pleasure in moderation felt tainted after Julia's disobedience. Imagine that, an emperor refusing his own vintage because his daughter had too much of a taste for life. Meanwhile, Rome buzzes. The Senate debates moral decay. Poets whisper allegories about the fallen star of virtue. You can hear the collective gasp of the empire, as though one woman's private rebellion threatens to undo its golden facade. Augustus's moral empire was built on family honor. Julia's flirtations weren't just scandal, they were philosophical mutiny. One evening, Julia walks through the garden, the air thick with the scent of myrtle and rain. The fountains murmur, the statues glare. She pauses beside one, a likeness of her father in marble, and studies it as if trying to read his thoughts. You sense the tremor in her breath, though her expression stays calm. It's not guilt she feels, not yet. It's inevitability. That night, the emperor's agents report to him directly. They name her lovers, describe her meetings, even list the hours of the moon when she slipped from her quarters. One of them claims that the same temple steps once graced by her sandals were desecrated by embraces. Whether true or slander, it's enough. Augustus doesn't rage. He simply stops speaking. For a man who conquered the world, silence becomes his sharpest weapon. He gathers the Senate. He recites the law. And then, with eyes colder than the marble busts surrounding him, he declares that his daughter has lived unworthily of herself and her lineage. You're there, at least in spirit, when Julia hears the verdict. She doesn't cry. She lifts her chin, meeting her father's gaze, and for a flicker of a heartbeat, you see something that's not fear but pity, as if she knows that the empire has wounded itself by punishing the one person who dared to live beyond its rules. Outside, thunder rolls over the 7 hills. The emperor's spies have done their work. The golden girl of Rome is about to vanish into exile, and all of Rome will pretend it's justice. You wait to the tolling of temple bells. The sound carries through the marble avenues like an omen, sharp and clear. Rome, that city of masks and marble, has finally torn off one. By noon, every market stall and bathhouse is humming with the same words. Julia has been disgraced. The scandal breaks like a summer storm, fast, furious, and impossible to ignore. According to one version, it begins on the very steps of the Temple of Apollo, the god of order and light. Guards claim to have found evidence of her secret meetings there, tokens of her lovers, letters, wine cups, perhaps even garments left behind. Whether any of it was real or fabricated hardly matters. The story burns brighter than truth. You follow her through the corridors as messengers rush in and courtiers rush out. Her attendants weep, her friends vanish, and her father refuses to see her. Julia, however, does not beg. She stands by the window of her chamber, gazing at the city that once adored her, now turning on her with the ferocity of a betrayed lover. Historians still argue whether Augustus staged her exposure deliberately, or whether her enemies seized an opportunity to perfect to waste. Some say he meant only to warn her, not destroy her. Others claim he needed to prove that no one, not even his own blood, was above the laws he'd built. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between politics and heartbreak. The Senate gathers. Poets are silenced. Tiberius, far away in Rhodes, hears the news and reportedly mutters that fortune favors the patient. You can almost taste the bitterness in that remark. A mainstream fact anchors this chaos. Augustus did not execute Julia's lovers outright. Instead, he offered them the dignity of suicide, Rome's cruel version of mercy. Aulus Antonius, once her most daring admirer, accepted it. His final act, a note written in verse, was destroyed by imperial order. You can only imagine the poetry that died with him. A quirky tidbit from later gossip, when questioned by her father about how she could so openly defy his moral code, Julia supposedly replied, "Because I take none but those who are willing, each one worthy of Caesar's lineage." True or not, that line alone ensured her immortality in dinner party retellings for centuries. As the verdict spreads, Rome splits into factions. Some pity her, calling her punishment too severe. Others sneer that it's divine justice. Augustus himself appears in public pale and weary, claiming that the gods demanded this sacrifice for the good of Rome. Yet even his closest allies notice his eyes. When her name is spoken, how they cloud with something very close to grief. You stand beside Julia as the guards arrive. She's allowed only a small chest of personal items, a few scrolls, some clothes, and a miniature of her children. Her youngest daughter cries and clings to her robe, But Julia bends down, whispers something soft, and untangles the little hands herself. She will not let anyone else do it for her. The people watch in silence as she's led through the streets. No cheers, no curses, just the hush of awe that greets the fall of someone too bright to ignore. The steps of Apollo, once her playground of whispers, gleam cold in the daylight. A bird lands where she once laughed, before she boards the ship that will carry her away. She turns one last time toward the city. The wind catches her veil, lifting it like a banner. For a heartbeat, you could swear she almost smiles, not in defiance, but in a kind of strange relief, as if the performance is finally over, and she can, at last, stop pretending. The oars dip into the Tiber, the crowd disperses, the empire exhales. Augustus returns to his laws, his temples, his marble self-control. But somewhere, deep within the silence of Rome, the name Julia continues to echo, not as a warning, but as a reminder that even in a city obsessed with virtue, desire will always find its voice. The sea is cruel that night. Waves slap against the hull like accusations, salt biting the air. You stand with Julia on the deck, her cloak whipped by wind, her eyes fixed on the horizon where Rome disappears into darkness. Behind her, the city still glows faintly, a smear of torchlight over marble. Ahead, only black water and exile. Her destination is Pandateria, a barren island in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Today, it's known as Ventotene. Back then, it was the empire's oubliette for disgraced women. You can almost feel the weight of its isolation, sharp cliffs, no harbor, the wind always speaking in a tone of judgment. Exile there wasn't just punishment, it was erasure. Historians still argue whether Augustus chose the island for its remoteness or its symbolism. Pandateria was small enough to hold, yet large enough to forget someone on. It was the same island where Julia's own mother, Scribonia, had been banished years earlier. Some poetic cruelty in that, don't you think? The emperor's two greatest irritations, wife and daughter, sent to the same lonely rock. When Julia arrives, there's no ceremony, no welcome. Just guards, stone huts, and a ration of bread, oil, and water. The silk and gold of her former life vanish overnight. Her jewelry is confiscated. Her books are censored. Even letters from her children are inspected before reaching her hands. Yet you watch her face and see no tears, just that same stubborn composure that infuriated emperors and enchanted poets alike. A mainstream fact, Augustus forbade any man to visit her, and ordered that no wine be brought to the island. Apparently, even grapes were too dangerous in her hands. And yet, a quirky tidbit from one account suggests the guards occasionally smuggled her diluted wine in exchange for stories. Julia would pour a drop into the sea for Neptune, she said, and sip the rest with a smile that must have tasted of memory. Days blur into wind and salt. She walks the cliffs barefoot, talking to herself, to the sea, to ghosts of what-ifs. Sometimes she hums a line from a love poem, one of Ovid's, maybe, and you can almost hear the defiance in it. Even the waves, she murmurs, understand longing. At night, the stars stretch over Pandateria like a second empire, vast and unreachable. Julia sleeps on a straw mat, her hands folded beneath her cheek. The palace silk is gone, but her dreams remain vivid. She dreams of laughter, of moonlit salons, of Iollas reciting poetry until the candles melted. Sometimes she wakes laughing softly, and the guards exchange nervous glances, unsure whether to pity or fear her. Meanwhile, in Rome, Augustus's propaganda machine goes into overdrive. Statues of virtue are raised. Laws are reaffirmed. The message is clear. The empire is spotless again. But the people remember differently. In taverns and marketplaces, they whisper that the emperor has sacrificed his own blood for the illusion of purity. Some even claim that the gods themselves mourn Julia. Storms battering the coast for 3 days. After her exile began, you see her one afternoon, kneeling beside a small patch of dirt she's turned into a garden. She plants herbs, basil, sage, and something fragrant she can't name. A woman must cultivate something, she says quietly, brushing soil from her hands. If not her heart, then her ground. There's wit in the words, yes, but also wisdom. Earned the hard way. Months pass, then years. Occasionally, a letter arrives from her mother, sometimes from her father, always terse. Augustus never visits, though sources claim he once sailed near the island without stopping. Historians still argue whether that was guilt or cowardice. Seasons change, and Julia begins to fade. Not from grief but from stillness. The island becomes her world, the sea her confessor. And you, standing there beside her as gulls wheel above, can feel how the silence itself has turned into company. One evening, she looks at you or perhaps through you and says, "Rome built me like a statue, and then shattered me for moving." The wind steals the words, but they linger somewhere between history and eternity. The years on Pandateria stretch like the horizon, endless, repeating, impossible to measure. You can almost hear the tick of time in the drip of rain from the cliffside caves. Julia no longer counts days. She counts letters, each one a lifeline, though most never arrive. The emperor's scribes open, edit, and destroy at will, as if controlling her words could undo her legacy. You sit beside her as she composes yet another, ink made from burnt olive pits, paper scavenged from merchant scraps. Her handwriting trembles, but her phrasing still carries that same wit that once charmed senators. "To those who still think of me," she writes, "know that exile cannot reach the mind, only the body." She seals it with a piece of wax pressed from a seashell. Historians still argue whether any of these letters truly survived, but a few lines attributed to her echo through later writings so tender they seem to belong to no one else on the island. Seasons have moods instead of names. The summer is harsh, the winter quiet, and the sea always restless. Julia's once golden hair has bleached pale from the sun. Her gowns, now patched linen, hang loose around a frame grown spare but still graceful. She tends her little herb garden with devotion, whispering to the plants as if they were her children. Maybe, in some symbolic way, they are. Every so often, supply boats come bringing soldiers, grain, news of the empire. You hear them whisper about Tiberius, Julia's son, now grown into the grim, reluctant heir of Augustus. Irony doesn't escape her. The son she bore to save her father's dynasty will one day rule it, perhaps with the same cold hand that banished her. She smiles at the thought, half pride, half sorrow. A mainstream fact: when Augustus died in 14 CE, Julia's exile wasn't lifted. Tiberius, now emperor, confirmed her confinement and cut her allowance. Officially, it was for the peace of the state. Unofficially, it was family revenge served cold. Some even claimed he had the island's guards restrict her food, though records differ. A quirky tidbit tells of a fisherman who once threw her a basket of figs. As his boat passed the shore, she sent him a poem in return, scratched onto a fragment of driftwood, thanking him for the taste of the world. Whether true or apocryphal, it feels too human to ignore Julia still finding ways to charm the living sea. By now, she writes not to be heard but to remember. You can sense it as she reads aloud under the lantern light, stories of laughter in marble halls, of the scent of myrrh at her wedding feasts, of whispers beneath the portico of Livia. She writes of Iollas too, not by name but by shadow, the one who dared to see me as mortal. It's both confession and conjuring spell. Sometimes she pauses and looks up at you, eyes bright despite everything. "History will forget what I said," she murmurs, "but maybe not how I said it." And she's right. Her words, if not literal, have survived through gossip, through poets, through the strange affection Rome still held for its most scandalous daughter. Toward her final years, her health wanes. She suffers fevers, her hands trembling as she writes. Yet when you sit by her, she insists on reading aloud bits of Virgil and Ovid, her old companions in rebellion. They banished him too, she says, smiling faintly at Ovid's name. Maybe Pandateria is where poets and sinners meet in the afterlife. She often watches the sea at sunset, the light spilling like molten bronze over the waves. It reminds her of Rome, the eternal city, glowing from afar, unreachable. Once, she asks quietly, "Do you think he ever missed me?" She means Augustus. You want to tell her yes, that even emperors can regret. But the truth is tangled in marble and politics. Historians still argue whether Augustus's sorrow for Julia was real or merely convenient. The final letter she writes is short, barely a page. "To whoever remembers me," it begins, "know that I lived as Rome taught me, hungry for greatness and punished for desire." She folds it carefully, as if it were a prayer. As the waves whisper against the rocks, you realize her story isn't one of disgrace but endurance. The empire forgot her name for centuries. Yet somehow, here you are listening still. You wake to the sound of surf, soft as breath against stone. The sea has calmed, as though it too has grown old and gentle. Julia lies nearby, wrapped in a faded shawl, her once bright hair silvered by salt and time. She doesn't rise early anymore. There's no reason to. The island's rhythm has slowed to match her heartbeat in the final years of her exile. Her world becomes smaller, yet strangely fuller. The guards no longer fear her. Some even speak to her kindly. A few call her Domina, out of habit or respect. One young soldier brings her olive branches for her garden. Another carves her a small wooden figurine goddess with broken arms. For luck, he says awkwardly. Julia smiles. Ah, but I already used all of mine. Historians still argue whether she died in 14 or 29 CE. The records are vague. The tones evasive, as though Rome itself didn't want to admit what it had done. Most agree she was allowed to move from Pandateria to Rhegium, a quieter exile on the mainland. Before the end, there, she lived in a modest villa by the sea. The same sea that once carried her away from everything she knew. You can imagine her on a terrace, wrapped in wool, watching ships pass, wondering if any were bound for Rome. A mainstream fact, Tiberius never granted her recall, though her daughter, Julia the Younger, would later share a similar fate, proof that history repeats, especially when it's cruel. The dynasty that had once called itself divine seemed cursed by its own obsession with purity. Yet Julia's legend didn't fade. A quirky tidbit from later chroniclers claims sailors near Pandateria used to see a woman's silhouette, walking the cliffs on moonlit nights, her hair streaming like a banner, her voice lost in the wind. The Lady of the Isles, they called her a ghost, or perhaps just memory refusing to die. In her final days, Julia writes no more letters. Her hands are too weak, her ink long gone. But she dictates a few words to a servant, a fragment that survives. Barely legible in an ancient archive, Rome will remember me, if only to warn others. She was right again. Even in ruin, she shaped her own myth. You picture her last morning, the pale light crawling over her face, the faint smile that flickers there. Maybe she's dreaming of laughter in the portico, of a hand brushing hers at midnight, of a city too proud to forgive. When the servant finds her, she looks peaceful, as if she's finally outrun the empire that hunted her heart. Time moves on. The emperors change. Temples crumble. Names are worn smooth by centuries. Yet when you stand on the coast of modern Ventotene and feel the same wind on your skin, you can almost hear her voice beneath the surf, still teasing, still defiant, still alive, because Julia the Elder was never merely the emperor's daughter. She was the woman who dared to test the boundaries of power, beauty, and desire in a world that worshipped all three but allowed none of them to belong to her. And though her story ends far from Rome, it leaves behind a question that still lingers in the dark. What happens when a woman's heart refuses to obey an empire? The waves roll in answer, timeless and indifferent. So now, the sea fades to a hush, and your breathing slows to match its rhythm. The story that began in gold and marble closes here, on soft sand and twilight. You feel the quiet weight of centuries settle around you, gentle as a blanket. Julia's laughter has gone, her footsteps erased by tide. But something of her still glimmers like starlight on distant water. It's strange, isn't it, how history remembers scandal louder than sorrow? And yet it's the human moments that stay. A letter written by lamplight, a smuggled fig, a woman who once ruled every room she entered, and then learned to rule only herself. You wonder if she ever truly regretted anything, or if exile, in its terrible calm, taught her the one thing Rome never could: peace. Now the torches are out. The empire sleeps, and the sea keeps her secrets. Let the sound carry you there, to Pandateria's edge, to the salt air and the whisper of waves. The forbidden flirtations are long over, but the echo of them still dances through time. Soft and shimmering. Rest now, dreamer. The past is quiet for the night.